change in the fundraising sector has never been greater. But innovations in technology are evolving faster than our ability to understand them. Are these advances good or bad? Do they have unintended consequences? And what is the application to the global fundraising sector? That's what we're here to find out. Welcome to the Fundraising AI podcast, your up-to-date resource for responsible AI for the global fundraising community, hosted by Nathan Chappell and Scott Rosenkrantz.
Hey everyone, we're back for another episode of the Fundraising AI podcast. Today, I have a special guest with me, and it's going to be super fun to dive in deep on what's going on in AI in academia, in kind of from a current state, from a future state. So someone that I met a while back, and I can't remember how we met, but we've had a conversation or two since. We actually met in person last week. I'm here with Rafeel Wasif, who is a professor or assistant professor at Portland State University. And I think from the first time that I was connected to him, I was like, oh, wait, this person's actually teaching on this subject. I'd love to go in deeper and actually get a better understanding of what's going on. So, Rafeel, it's great to be able to connect with you on the podcast. It's been fun to connect with you a few other times and actually spend dinner together a week ago in San Diego. And welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Nathan, and really excited to be here.
So wait, let's go back real quick because you were at AFP Icon in San Diego last week. I think, was that a week ago? Yeah, just time flies. So
yeah.
Was that your first AFP conference? Was it your first nonprofit conference? Like, what did you think? Did it meet your expectations? I'm not sure what you were expecting when you went in.
Yeah, no, I think that was my first AFP Icon. Definitely not my first nonprofit conference because I've been kind of pretty active in the nonprofit space. Locally, I've been to N10 a few times, so just kind of know a little bit more about that space. But yeah, AFP was just this space of really understanding what's happening in the fundraising process and kind of thinking more about how technology is both helping and hindering the process. So I think my real hope was to learn from practitioners, and I think that was a real fun part, just to kind of know what's happening, how people are thinking about it, and it's always fun to connect.
Yeah, I'm curious what your perspective is on this. And this is not a loaded question. I was speaking with Microsoft at one point, Jeremy Pittman, who's also been on the podcast. And we were just comparing how I think maybe last year in 2025, we thought, okay, well, you know what? The industry is still kind of warming up to the AI kind of, buzz. And that 2026, certainly everything would be like people's hair on fire. What was your take? Did you feel like when you came in, did you think like the sector was, from just all the conversations you had, ahead of where you thought they were, behind of where you thought things were, or just kind of right where you thought?
I think it really depends on who you're talking to. I think so. I went to N10 like 2 years ago, and some of the panels were all about like how to write an email on ChatGPT, and this time panels were agentic AI and how to fundraise through agentic AI. So I think there is definitely a lot of good people kind of thinking the right questions, and I think that's where I feel like the nonprofit and the mission-driven sector can really take the lead. Is they're thinking about technology, but they're also thinking about ethics and ethical adoption. So I think in that space, a lot of the conversations ended up with like human in the loop. Like, okay, we do this, but there's human in the loop. So I think in that space, I was definitely expecting to be a little further behind, but I think I was pleasantly surprised by the level of conversations that I had and the level of literacy they have on what's happening in this space. So I think I was honestly pleasantly surprised a little.
Well, and that's where I didn't get a lot of time to spend in sessions at all. So I wasn't hearing kind of the organic, and a lot of the sessions are, essentially co-presented or presented by practitioners that are actually trying things. So that's very encouraging. I would say on the AFP Icon from the sponsorship side, in the vendor room, I thought there would be more, but also because I'm a little biased because I go to technology conferences. And when I'm at the technology conference, obviously 100% of every conversation is about agentic AI and how, all of those companies are going to, transform business as we know it. And so when I go to the nonprofit sector, it's like a little bit of whiplash. Like, I'm like, wait, why are we not talking about this more? So that's good to hear. And I think that's also consistent with what I've seen in terms of like even a lot of our virtuous customers who are calling us saying, hey, do you have an MCP? Because, we want to build out these new dashboards or workflows. And so we want to be able to connect the data. So we're seeing more and more nonprofits gain AI literacy and start to experiment because of things like Claude Cowork and other things that make AI really accessible. So that's great to hear. I'm really glad that you were feeling kind of that sense of kind of innovation and maybe even a little bit ahead of where you thought what everyone would be.
And I think one of the best things I found about AFP Icon is they're coming with the problem first and people first perspective. So
Mhm.
I went with a lot of people who kind of gave me a problem that nonprofits face, and then they were like, "This is how the technology can help," which I think is one of the best ways of thinking about change management and thinking with the problem, right? And I talk to all kind of different people, and I think that's why I always say, like, if you want to make people comfortable with this technology, start with the problem that it can solve in their lives rather than just kind of telling them that this is a technology that they should be amazed by. So I really like
Right.
that perspective that a lot of people are bringing that.
Yeah. Well, and the nonprofit sector has plenty of problems. I mean, the sector exists. I don't say that to be mean. I say that
Hmm.
the nonprofit sector exists to solve problems. And so,
Hmm. Hmm.
at their core, every nonprofit should be in the business of putting themselves out of business to
Hmm.
solve the problem into which they're not needed. So let's go back to the beginning. So I totally derailed that because I was just curious because we were both together. So going back, just go ahead and explain kind of who you are, your kind of your origin story, definitely what led you to basically teaching nonprofit at Portland State University. And then I want to peel back the onion on that whole thing. So why you, why nonprofit in general, of all the things that you could and probably were interested in at certain points in your life? Like what brought you here?
Oh, definitely, that's a really good question. So we'll have to go a while back. So I came fresh out of undergrad, just kind of trying to figure out. I was in Pakistan at that point. I got some interviews with the banks, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I want to do. My dad used to be a banker. My brother is an accountant. So then we came with this kind of corporate, like a lot of people that were doing similar stuff. But for some reason, my first job ended up to be an NGO in Pakistan, and I was like, okay, this is the first job. I'll get bored by it. I'll kind of get into something more, money related and all the other things. But honestly, that job was just such a transformational experience. Just the amount of fun I had talking to people, and I just felt more and more connected with the space. And I had just so many questions that I wasn't able to understand and answer: donor relationships, funder relationships, all the kind of thing that you are really trying to understand. And I was like, okay, like these are things that are being applied, but how can I understand more broader? And so by some luck, I got a Fulbright. I came to the US, and I still kind of was kept asking these questions with myself. And I just met this advisor who was very similarly thinking. And when you just have this aha moment sometimes in life, I think once he started talking about his research agenda on NGOs and nonprofits and collective action problems and fundraising, it was just that something clicked. And I wasn't planning to do a PhD, but then I talked to him. I'm like, hey, I want to work with you. Oh, and one thing led to the other. And so I just was so interested in all the issues that nonprofits keep on facing. And I wanted that from like more of a theoretical perspective. But then the problem that soon emerged is like I was coming from a academic space. Like I used to work with these organizations. So I just found this really interesting space where I can think broadly about these issues, but I can also at the same time apply them. And so I think that so nonprofit became a laboratory for what I think, and back and forth. And so that's how I ended up in some of these nonprofit spaces. I was working on machine learning when in my grad school, so I was using it for coding some articles, thinking more about machine learning, what that means. And so once I got out of grad school, I got my job. I realized artificial intelligence, or machine learning as we used to call it then, it's not just a methodological problem, it's a governance problem, it's a leadership problem, it's a all these other things problem, strategy problem. And so I started connecting these dots on like, okay, what does it mean to use these things ethically? What does it mean to use it for strategy? And that kind of really got me into some of these spaces and thinking more about AI, but that what it also means for nonprofits and how they can think about these things. I think those kind of things, that love for technology to an extent, but also being very suspicious of it, while also the love for nonprofits and what they do, and also the love for research. I think they just kind of combine well.
Right. And you did your dissertation at Lilly School of Philanthropy
No,
or
so
Lilly or
I did
IU?
my PhD at University of Washington. I was a
Oh,
postdoc at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. Worked
oh,
with
you
there
are.
with
Okay.
Sharik Siddiqui. Did a lot of work on Muslim Philanthropy Initiative. We did a lot of research on minorities and their giving and how they give. So that was a really and we still work together. So it's been a friendship for a while, and I call him a
That's great.
mentor and a friend. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of friends in common then, I'm sure, like Una Asili and
hmm
Amir Pasek, who had actually written endorsement for our book. Yeah, that's
hmm
awesome. So, gosh, there's so many things I want to talk about because
hmm
as someone who's like actually done research and studied, but then also has your hands on one side in academia and training the next generation, and the other is as an author, you're already a published author and you're writing a new book. I want to dive into that. So, where you're at today, so you decided to write a new book, and I don't know if you have a timeline or deadline. And even if the title is still called this, but co-intelligence and mission-driven organizations, love you to be able to explain what that means. Of course, the term co-intelligence as well. Many people have heard this on the podcast because we talked about Ethan Mollick's book, Co-Intelligence, and in which case he explains that. But I'd love to hear from you. So you've been doing this for a while. You decide to write another book specifically on AI for mission-driven organizations. Why that topic? Why now? What are you hoping to achieve?
I think the word co-intelligence, as you rightly pointed out, comes from Ethan. I think I just love his work. I think those are some of the books that you really read and it kind of really connects with you. So he does a lot of really cool work on co-intelligence. And I think I had been thinking something similar, but I think he really, what's the word, consolidated my thinking on this idea of co-intelligence because what he says is we're dealing with a different kind of intelligence right now. Because I've worked with machine learning, I've worked with some other tools, technology. They were a little bit more deterministic. They were not able to learn on themselves if you give them something, right? And that's the difference between using some of these tools. So for me, that kind of raises a lot of questions for an organization, right? If you're working with something like a cloud or something that is intelligent, how do you work with them at the same time? How do you basically think about them? How do you think about strategy with them? How do you evaluate them, right? How do you think about leadership in these spaces? Because at some level, these bots or these tools are turning into some kind of like I would say like a pseudo employee in a lot of these organizations, right? So a lot of our thinking about nonprofits and technology has always been about technology that was like needed intelligence from us from some level. But these are a very different way of thinking about it. You talk to it one day, the next day it knows more about you, right? Sometimes it's challenging you, sometimes it's kind of contradicting you, sometimes it's trying to flatter you. And so it's kind of creating this personality that you have to deal with all of these spaces, right? So that was my initial kind of like aha moment with this co-intelligence. I'm like, okay, theoretically, it makes so much more sense as we're moving into these spaces. But organizationally, it made so much more sense for me too, because we are incorporating them in our organizations, right? So, how do you start thinking of them and thinking about how to work with them? And the part that I really wanted to focus on is the mission driven organization, right? Because for profits may have a little bit of a different mission. I mean, it could be a little bit more focused on the KPIs, right? Like the KPIs are maybe the amount of potential funding you can get, other ideas. But mission driven organizations are dealing with very different kind of KPIs. So equity, justice, social justice, fairness, equity, inclusion. So how do you start thinking of including some of those KPIs as you're working on some of these things, right? So kind of thinking about having that robotic or AI, but how do you evaluate in a way? How do you make it strategic in a way that it meets your missions rather than the other way around? So I think that was being the main focus on my book, like thinking about these things in a way that can literally help with an organization, like the question of leadership in the age of AI. What does that mean? The question of evaluation in the age of AI, the question of strategy in the age of AI, all of these things, if we do well, can really turn these organizations into something that understands the good about AI, but also the problems with AI, and kind of starting to align with those things with the mission. So that's where I'm thinking more broadly with this book.
Yeah, that's great. And of course, you're completely aligned on that front where I think about, and I hear a lot from organizations and people are like, well, is AI going to replace me? And Ethan, has a strong metaphor. I forget, it's cyborgs and what does he call it? Cyborgs and mentor, or some other analogy that he uses a lot.
Hmm.
But going back to the idea of co-intelligence is that for one, have to recognize that your mission is bigger than you, right? And is bigger than even your organization. Like you could spend all of your time and not achieve it. And that's with your own kind of human limitation. But if you could think about co-intelligence and have the ability to amplify your effort by a scale, like if we think about programmers right now, programmers can amplify their scale of an individual by, I don't even know what the actual mathematical formula is right now, but it's like 100x. So a person that, is a coder that is now using whatever tool, whether it's Cursor or Claude Code or whatever it might be, is it's probably close to 50 to 100x their output. And if every nonprofit professional could do that, imagine what could be achieved for their organization and for their mission. At the same time, I think a lot of nonprofits spend a lot of time protecting kind of busy work, if you will, like menial busy work. Frankly, we call it crap work because that work's not bringing anyone joy. It's needed a body to do it. And I think the future of co-intelligence is that then you can actually truly augment and support your effort to do the things or offload the things that you don't like doing to do more of the things that you do like doing. And so I know that seems so cliche, but I still see a lot of nonprofits that are just trying to control everything and do everything longhand the way that they've always done them. So this sounds great. And I don't know what your timeline is. I think it's fairly close, right? In terms of when people would expect to see it sometime this year.
Hopefully in next year. So I mean, we
Okay.
did promise a
Okay.
lot with our publisher. So this summer, I'm really hoping to kind of sit down, and I mean, I've already have like probably 40 to 50% of the material, but it just
Nice.
needs to synthesize and sit together and kind of really think about how to kind of
Yeah.
combine all of the things. So
And AI helps that so much. I mean, my first book came out 13 days before ChatGPT came out. And I can tell you it took 2.5 years to write that. And a majority of the time was spent researching, reading, but also thinking of analogies, like just spending a lot of time thinking about analogies. And I talked to my co-author, Brian, and I'd be like, have you ever heard of an organization that kind of looks like this and it has had that outcome? And then you like spend a lot of time on Google and you're just researching these. And now, like, as a research partner, AI is insane because Scott and I wrote nonprofit AI in like 4.5 months because we knew what we wanted to write about, but analogies and case studies, like it was able to surface those for us in ways that were just unreal. So you're going to have a fun summer, I think, the hard thing is just getting time like in that thought space where you're like, I got dedicated time. Your phone is going like crazy. And I imagine as a professor, do you teach during the summer or do you get the summer off to kind of regroup?
summer is time for regrouping, basically, which is good. But I think for me, I think AI as a research partner, I would think of it as a co-intelligence tool. So I think it really helps you connect the dots at the higher level. So one of the tools that I kind of sometimes use is the LLM notebook. And I think what I do is I make an argument and ask it to argue against me. I'm like, what's the problem with my argument? And I think it really helps me tighten some of that kind of spaces. And I think that's the part I kind of still keep on thinking, even in writing, it needs like we are still the intelligent being really being creative and creating all these processes and really thinking out of the box and all of these other things and kind of really making the dots. But I think it really helps with some of that strategic thinking, which I think is probably you guys also felt the same thing, right? And for me, it's been such a powerful tool. Like, what are the problems with this? Like, be as, yeah, just try to critique me, be as critical as you can possibly be. And I think that itself has been a very strong way of kind of thinking through some of these things.
That's an interesting trend I've seen. I've seen this with our CEO, Gabe Cooper, Scott Rosencrantz have created basically COOs within their AI system, whether using whatever they're using to do that, to help keep them kind of straight and in line, to challenge them when they start to drift, to challenge them at that high level. I see some of the most progressive uses of AI right now are really helping stretch critical thinking rather than replace it. And I know for me it definitely does that because I have lots of ideas. I don't sleep a lot and I'll come up with these ideas of like or I synthesize when I travel the same question or theme of question comes up a lot. And so I can start to really challenge, like, is this just my own bias, or is this something that is legitimate and something that deserves further exploration? So going a little bit, because again, in terms of teaching, so from an academia perspective, I think it's super interesting because I never intended to be a nonprofit. Most people don't intend to be a nonprofit. I don't think a school up until my second master's even offered a nonprofit any class in nonprofit. Is that a trend that's changing now? Are most colleges and universities offering a nonprofit, either a concentration or an elective, where you could be like, oh, I'm curious about this thing? Is that a new trend, or is that something that's really stands out at Portland State?
I think there are like a lot of programs on public administration in general that have like a nonprofit concentration that we actually have at Portland State. So you can do public administration masters, but you have a focus on nonprofit. So I see a trend pretty common there. There are some programs. I think Lilly has a master's in nonprofit leadership. Portland State used to have one. I think we don't have one right now. So because we wanted to focus on the NPA, so there's definitely that space. And I think again, some of the value of these programs that I notice is like, you kind of really focus on some of the other issues that nonprofit can face, nonprofit leadership, and then you learn a lot of the hard skills, the budgeting, the HR, all the other things while kind of working on the softer skills. So I think in that way, it's like a very good, you learn program eval, which is another hard skill that a lot of nonprofits, kind of get into. So in that way, it kind of really helps. And then you kind of combine it with questions of leadership, like what does leadership mean versus management. So in most of my class, I ask this question: what is an ethical manager and what is an ethical leader? But those are very two different things that you can kind of think about, right? And so that question, I think, really opens up like, what is leadership in the nonprofit sector? Are you a rule follower, or do you have a vision, right? How do you really get people into some of those spaces? So I think everybody gets different things from that program, but I think that part is really critical as you think about leadership in the nonprofit sector. And we have some amazing leaders. So I always tell my students, especially since we are in Portland, like people with the best hearts possible, but you also need some of that brain, some of that strategy to really kind of make sure that it's sustainable what we are doing, all the kind of thing, quote unquote, boring things. Like you need to make sure that the program continues for a long time. And that's what I feel like these programs really help a lot of people with these amazing hearts to really kind of dive into more. Because I don't think we can teach them passion. They're already super passionate. It's more about picking up that passion and being strategic about it. So I think that's the way I think these programs are very useful for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'm curious again, not to like go too deep into this, but I spent quite a bit of time in higher ed institutions, and I see like a real great division right now, a division between orgs that are embracing AI, saying that it's their moral imperative to evolve as a college or university, because say a student graduates and they're going to be required or asked to use all the tools at their disposal to be successful. But almost an equal number of other higher ed organizations are basically saying AI is the devil, and you can't use it. You have to sign something that says you're not going to use it because it's basically cheating. I clearly know where you stand on this, but is there tension within the university for you that talk about AI, or are you more progressive and just like use AI? And then tell me also kind of like some of the techniques that you're using to really help students not to quote unquote cheat or take the shortcut, but to actually develop those critical thinking skills.
No, I think the beauty of academia is all of us are pretty independent at some level. So even within my university, there are people who are pretty much no AI, and then there are like people like me who are like, this is an important part. So again, students are supposed to be challenged. Students are supposed to be exposed to all these different ideas about how to teach, right? So again, I mean, I was teaching this EMPA program this Saturday, and I think I've been talking to people about AI for a few years, and I kind of keep an eye on the panel data. And I kind of noticed that there's much more acceptance of AI for a lot of students, and these are leaders working for like 12 years. So one of my students, she is leading an organization that works with tribes, and she's basically saying it's like this is has to be tribes have to be at the forefront of this technology, because if we are not, then we would get affected by it without having our voice in it. So I do notice a trend that there is definitely an evolution and kind of like a acceptance, not acceptance, like at least initial kind of openness to the idea. Our university lets us decide the policy for our class, so it could be like completely no AI to like AI permissive. So, and I think I respect that. Again, I don't think my university is at the forefront of AI in any way, but I think giving us that freedom has really helped all of us to decide what we want to do, right? And I always say to my students, I'm like, and I was talking to city officials, and I'm like, I like you, I go to these technology private sector conference, and I see what is happening in that space. I'm like, one industry is getting disrupted every day, literally, and eventually, people are already distrusting nonprofits and cities for a bunch of reasons. And my question is, they'll see that and then they'll come to you. And then they'll ask me even more questions, right? So for me, the question is not even adopting AI anymore. I think my question is how to adopt it in a way that is true to our humane values, true to our mission, and make sure that we are steering the wheel rather than AI or technology or all of these kind of thinking. And I feel like students are becoming more and more open to it. And
Right.
my pedagogical approach is very interesting. Like I start with this, you start with a lot of people very suspicious about AI, and for a good reason, right? Like you can't tell them like you're wrong. And then you like start asking, like, and that's my governance mechanism is like, what would make you comfortable about an AI decision? And then there's a back and forth, like, okay, citizen feedback. I'm like, okay, we incorporate that. Transparency. I'm like, okay, we can incorporate that. It explains to me. I'm like, okay, we can incorporate that. Human in the loop. I'm like, okay, we can incorporate that. And then at that point, I'm like, if you incorporate all of those things, do you feel more comfortable with this judgment? And a
Right.
lot of the time, they start thinking, then like, okay, that's fine. So again, my sense is with people in the mission driven organization, they have fears and completely rightly so. You can't just say like your fears are wrong because I don't even know. You don't know. No one really knows where AI is going, but validating them and then kind of saying like what would you make you comfortable with this technology at what level, I think that really opens up these boxes. And then kind of feel like people are really pissed in the first 30 minutes, and then by the
Right.
next 30 minutes they're like, okay, that makes sense, okay, I can pick this up. And then you get some people like, okay, can you talk to my organization, can you talk to these people? And that's when like they've kind of really gone from like very suspicious to at least being open to it, right? And I think for me that's the biggest success. They kind of thinking about or making them think about these things.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of empowerment and agency at the individual and organizational level where, to your point, you're basically someone has this feeling that AI is going to destroy the planet and the human race. And that's another conversation we could have. But on the individual level, this is not happening to you. You have a choice in how and what you adopt. And so individually, it's a very interesting informal poll. From an informal poll, I ask an audience, almost uniformly, how many people here have values? And it's not a trick question. So hopefully 100% of the hands go up, like I have values. But then when I ask how many of you have your values written down, and very few, like only a few percentage, maybe 5% of people have their values written down. But when you're thinking about AI that has like tremendous both short-term and long-term consequences, then, of course, understanding what your values are, both individually and through your organization, is the only thing that differentiates you from like the person who has agency versus a person who doesn't. And so I like that approach in terms of like truly understanding what are the things that we have to safeguard, what are the things that we have to really protect, and make sure that you're holding true to those areas that are important to you.
And I've started to use, and I think this is part of my book, is AI is a change management problem at its core. And to make
Hmm.
it as part of the organizational culture, you really have to understand people's fears and address them at that level. And that for me, and I was talking to a city recently, and that's what I was talking to them. I'm like, it's a change management problem.
Yeah.
Try to understand their fears, try to understand where their skills are, and then
Mhm.
literally ask them one problem in their life that they really struggle with that AI can help. And I feel
Yeah.
like just taking that space takes people so much away from this AI skeptic to someone that is like, okay, it could help. And again, that's what I've always talked about, people first or a problem first approach, rather
Right.
than just kind of throwing technology at people and kind of making them like, there is this thing and now the leadership is telling you that. I think that itself is going to make people even more suspicious of this technology. And I've seen a lot of organizations, the quote unquote AI first organization, and it's a buzzword, but I think I've noticed a lot of them are incorporating it at their cultural level, at their organic level, rather than just thinking of it as something. Because people have fears, and I completely, totally agree that those fears are legit. People are afraid that they're going to get displaced. All of the things are not coming from out of nowhere. And if we decline to hear them, I think we are kind of doing a disservice to the organization because they have to be creative. I was listening to this podcast yesterday and they were talking about it, like it's a creative force. I think this was like I think someone I don't remember. And they're like it's a creative force because it's gonna surprise you every day. And if you make it as part of your process, then the human creativity with this co-intelligence can create so many things that would really surprise us every day, right? And I feel like that's the organization that again, we all aspire to different things and we also low realities, right? I
Right.
feel like that's where the human creativity, that human endeavor can really shine. But it's not
Yeah.
going to be easy. And I completely agree if people are going to be scared for it for a while.
Yeah. No, I think helping, create frameworks that help you kind of understand what you will and will not do. And I spend most of my time talking about curiosity, imagination, adaptability, and urgency in that. And I've realized that while all those things are true, people also, we've lost a sense of childlike wonder that we had when we were kids because we work in these binary, work environments where there's right and wrong answers to everything. And we have these KPIs that are extremely rigid. So I do think that part of that is like one, anchoring your use of AI in some very values rooted frameworks, super important. And then after you've done that, then really relearn how you learn and start to explore, what it means to be curious and be imaginative. And that's where I see huge potential in the nonprofit sector. So I'm excited to read your book when you finish it and, really get into how mission-driven organizations can amplify that. So last question, I'm just curious, did you see the new movie yet, AI Doc, How I Became a Puck Optimist?
I've heard of it. A lot of people have told me that I
Oh,
should go
okay.
and watch
Okay.
it.
You did. Okay. Okay. Well, next time you and I have a conversation, we'll talk about it because I don't encourage you to watch it before bedtime. It's produced by Tristan Harris and Aza Raskin from Center for
Mhm.
Humane Technology and the guys who created Everything Everywhere All at Once. I'm a donor to Center for Humane Technology because I actually believe it's like one of the most important nonprofits today in terms of really hitting the pause button to think deeply about what we want the future of humanity to look like and how we help use our advocacy to shape AI in a way that's formative. But it's a great movie. Anyone who's listening should watch it. I think it's on streaming on Apple and YouTube now as of about a week ago. So no excuses to check it out. And again, if you decide to watch it before bed, that's on you, not me. I did, and I regret it because I was up at 3 a.m. just thinking about all these things. At the end of the day, I think we're building technology that no one really fully understands, which is why it's so important to understand who you are, what your values are, and how and when you'll use technology and how and when you won't use it. And I think all those things are just super important. So, any parting thoughts, anything that you want to leave Fundraising AI listeners with in terms of your work and your views on AI?
No, I think I'll just say one thing, and I think I don't have a good answer to that. So that's thought in my head, and I've been asking this with my students recently. So every day you decide, and for good reasons, you don't use AI for solving some of the biggest problems in the world. You're definitely, taking the right choice sometimes, but also think about every day you're not doing that. You're also not solving a lot of the biggest world's problems, right? So if you kind
Right.
of start thinking of it that way, and that's why I call the idea of ethical leadership, right? Like you're not
Mhm.
only living in a risk environment, but you're also kind of missing out on some of the things that challenging decisions can bring. And I don't say with any way that it's easy. That's why I always
Sure.
talk about these things, right? But it's always good to think about that. And I always say, like, I would always be an AI optimist who's suspicious. And I think I always want to bring forth the humanity, the co-intelligence, and thinking about what my intelligence means before I kind of really dig deep into what these technologies are. They're super exciting, but they're also scary.
Yeah.
And so having that balance is really important for people as they kind of, go to their journey. And also there's like creativity and excitement and wonder and all of those things are just, like you are important when you're trying with these technologies.
Yeah. Nope. I think that's a great way to leave us. A lot of things to wrestle with and to continue to explore. And thank you for showing that there's not just one way to do this. There's a way that and I think for nonprofits is nuanced and different than the private sector. I think it by nature of the work and trading trust for money or money for trust, or I guess more trust for money, that I think it's incumbent on the nonprofit to reflect and make sure that they use AI in a way that's aligned with those values and the values of humanity now and in the future. So thank you, Rafeel, for joining us on the podcast, and look forward to continue to watch your work. And I mean, I'm pretty sure we'll continue to see each other and do some fun things together. And so thanks for the time and for what you're doing to put a lot of just good thoughts and energy into the world and training up the next generation on how to make these decisions and thoughtfully and in a way that really will benefit, the future of humanity. So appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you so much, Nathan, and thank you for inviting me. This was such a fun conversation.
It's great. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone. We'll see you on another episode of the Fundraising AI podcast.